Have you ever wondered what it would be like to wake up one morning and find that something you do every day is suddenly illegal? Not a crime, not something harmful, but a simple, everyday act. For millions of Americans, this wasn't a hypothetical question. It was their reality. This is the story of how a single law, born from good intentions, plunged a nation into chaos, created criminal empires, and changed the course of American history forever. This is the story of Prohibition. To understand how America ended up banning alcohol, we have to go back to the early 20th century. This was a time of immense change. Cities were exploding in size, factories were humming with new machines, and waves of immigrants were arriving, all chasing the American dream. But with this rapid growth came anxiety. People worried about crime, social disorder, and what they saw as a decline in moral values. And for a growing number of Americans, one culprit stood out above all others: alcohol. Powerful movements, often led by religious groups and social reformers, began to paint a picture of a better America, an America without alcohol. They were called the Dries, and their message was compelling. They promised that banning alcohol would solve society's biggest problems. Imagine, they said, a country with no more public drunkenness, no more barroom brawls. Families would be stronger, workers would be more productive, and our cities would be safer. They argued that alcohol was a poison, destroying the fabric of the nation from the inside out. This movement, known as the temperance movement, wasn't new. It had been around for decades, but by the early 1900s, it had gained incredible political power. Groups like the Anti-Saloon League were masters of lobbying and public persuasion. They organized marches, published pamphlets, and pressured politicians relentlessly. They successfully framed the debate not just as a matter of public health, but as a moral crusade to save America's soul. Their influence grew and grew till finally, they achieved the unthinkable. In 1919, after years of intense campaigning, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified. It was a stunningly simple and direct piece of legislation. It banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors across the entire country. The law was set to take effect 1 year later, in January 1920. As the clock ticked down on the final night, America held its breath. People partied in the streets, toasting the end of an era. They bought up the last legal bottles of whiskey and beer. They went to sleep in one version of America and woke up in another. Overnight, the nation went dry. Or did it? When the sun rose on the first day of Prohibition, the legal alcohol industry vanished. Breweries closed their doors. Distilleries went silent. Thousands of saloons and bars, once the cornerstone of many communities, locked their gates for good. From the outside, it looked like the Dries had won. America was officially a sober nation. But behind closed doors, a very different story was unfolding. Human thirst, it turns out, is not so easily legislated away. Almost immediately, the country's relationship with alcohol didn't end. It just went underground. A new, secret world emerged. In the basements of apartment buildings, in the back rooms of restaurants, and behind unmarked doors, a new kind of establishment was born: the speakeasy. These were illegal bars where people could get a drink, listen to jazz music, and defy the law. To get in, you often needed a password or a special knock. They became glamorous symbols of rebellion, attracting men and women from all walks of life. And where did all this illegal alcohol come from? A whole new criminal industry exploded to meet the demand. Ordinary people turned into lawbreakers. Farmers with a surplus of corn discovered they could make more money turning it into moonshine than selling it as food. Doctors found a lucrative side hustle writing prescriptions for medicinal whiskey, which was still legal. But the real money, the big money, was in smuggling. Enter the bootlegger. These were the smugglers who brought alcohol into the country by land and sea. Sophisticated operations used fast boats, called rum runners, to outrun the Coast Guard, landing shipments of Canadian whiskey and Caribbean rum on secret beaches. Gangs organized convoys of trucks to bring booze across the border from Canada and Mexico. America was surrounded by a sea of alcohol, and the bootleggers were the ones who brought it ashore. This flood of illegal money had a terrifying and predictable consequence. it fueled the rise of organized crime. Before Prohibition, gangs were mostly small local operations, but now they had a billion-dollar industry to control. Criminal masterminds like Al Capone in Chicago built vast empires. They controlled the speakeasies, the bootlegging routes, and the distilleries. They weren't just criminals. They were CEOs of massive, violent corporations. And with that competition came unprecedented violence. Gangs fought brutal wars for control of territory. The streets of cities like Chicago became battlegrounds. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where Capone's men gunned down 7 rivals in a garage, became a horrifying symbol of just how lawless the country had become. The very law that was supposed to reduce crime had instead created a new, more organized, and far more violent class of criminal. The government found itself in an impossible situation. It had passed a law that a huge portion of the population simply had no intention of obeying. Enforcing prohibition was a nightmare. The federal government's Prohibition Bureau was tiny and underfunded. Agents were tasked with policing thousands of miles of coastline and borders, not to mention every city and town in between. It was an unwinnable war. Worse still was the rampant corruption. With so much money flowing from the illegal liquor trade, bribery became commonplace. Police officers, judges, and even federal agents were paid off to look the other way. This had a corrosive effect on the nation's trust in its own institutions. If the people enforcing the law were breaking it themselves, why should anyone else follow it? Respect for the law itself began to crumble. Prohibition also delivered a devastating blow to the economy. When breweries, distilleries, and saloons were forced to close, thousands of jobs were lost. We're talking about brewers, truckers, waiters, barrel makers, an entire ecosystem of employment wiped out. At the same time, the government lost a huge source of tax revenue. Before 1920, taxes on alcohol had funded a significant portion of government operations. Now, that money was gone and instead, it was flowing directly into the pockets of gangsters like Al Capone. By the late 1920s and early 1930s, the mood of the country had soured. The Great Depression had hit, and the arguments for prohibition were looking weaker than ever. The promises of a safer, more moral society had not come true. Crime was worse. Corruption was rampant, and the government was losing money at a time when it desperately needed it. The public conversation shifted. People stopped asking if prohibition was a good idea and started asking if it had been a colossal failure. The movement for repeal grew just as quickly as the movement for prohibition had a decade earlier. This time, the argument was about freedom, common sense, and economic recovery. Political leaders, including presidential candidate Franklin D. Roosevelt, saw the writing on the wall. The noble experiment, as it was once called, was over. In 1933, the 21st Amendment was passed, repealing the 18th. Prohibition was officially dead. Across the country, people celebrated. Breweries reopened. The taps started flowing again. But America was not the same country it had been 13 years earlier. Prohibition left a deep and lasting mark. It had strengthened organized crime, giving it the capital and structure to expand into other illegal activities for decades to come. It changed our drinking habits, popularizing cocktails as a way to mask the harsh taste of bastard gin. And most importantly, it served as a powerful lesson about the limits of law and the unintended consequences of trying to legislate morality. The story of Prohibition is a reminder that history is full of complex, unexpected turns. A law designed with the best of intentions to create a better world ended up creating a darker one. It shows that when a law is disconnected from the will of the people, it can transform a nation in ways that no one could have ever predicted. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. See you next time.